Hello and welcome back to the channel, to the PR and Communications Reflective account by me, Eddie Couple. So this is our second week, yeah, let's dive straight into it. Similar to last week, just want to sort of open with a few questions that were sort of on my mind this week. Definitely the prompts from the brief itself. The first one, how do I feel about myself as a potential sport marketer? So of course, like I said last week, I haven't taken anything sort of similar to this before. I did a business proposal in my home institution last year. A little bit, nothing similar as to this. But I think like I said, that's the reason why I took this course here, and I can kind of already see, certain roles that, I can't say for definite what I'm going to go into, but then definitely something along the lines of perhaps sort of managing a sports institution or business, or an athlete themselves, sort of managing their social media and their social presence, and definitely monitoring that. I can definitely something that interests me. I'm sure there's those sorts of roles already out there, sort of now. And then secondly, sort of what area would you like to strengthen your knowledge and skills? So definitely for me, it's writing. Writing is definitely my sort of weak point. So again, this is why I'm, kind of using this video podcast, or if you will, sort of as the avenue to kind of monitor, or for my reflection. Sort of that being said, I know writing isn't, it's not all. Writing's not everything in PR and communications, but I'm definitely with the press release in a few weeks time. Kind of seeing how my skills, in that sort of how I can grow in that, because definitely there's going to be things that or certain things we're going to articulate, and that's sort of my big issue there. So definitely with this, and definitely with the task with the press release, definitely see how my writing skills are reflected in that. So again, it'd be interesting to see us do that, and then maybe perhaps I'll reflect back on that. So some of the highlights for me from our second week of classes. So we discussed sort of Twitter and netiquette, or etiquette, if you will. So kind of how you should behave online, especially if you're trying to take a professional stance, or even if you're not, sort of thing. Kind of the best way to go about those things. So discuss sport and media sort of as equal partners, and how they both feed off each other and how they need each other. So we'll definitely be discussing that in this week's reflection. Competition for free time, that's something that popped up as well. Is indigenous sport under fire, or at sort of risk? So again, we'll be exploring more of that in this week's podcast. We'll look into that. What does promotion look like? Sort of from definitely from the consumer's point of view, and from both sides of the consumer, and then the business itself, and then media and public opinion, and how that can be sort of swayed, or what that can look like depending on the sources. So yeah, let's jump into it. So I thought this would be a good example of illustrating sport and media's relationship between each other. So here we have Cristiano Ronaldo, LeBron James, NFL linebacker Matt Judon, and Tiger Woods on the right, all using their social media accounts to promote products. So we always talk about social media kind of giving athletes a way to interact with their fans. Now they're also using it to endorse products directly and indirectly. So with the case of Tiger Woods, I mean, he doesn't even mention, hashtag Monster or something like that, or even their slogan. That he's simply just taking a picture of his golf bag, as I'm sure many golfers and professional golfers do. And of course, Monster, probably obviously gave him a bag for free, although they're sort of paying some money for that. But that's sort of the indirect, and then on the opposite side, you have the direct. Sort of promotion from Cristiano Ronaldo, and it's even got the tag sort of paid partnership with Clearsham. So that's kind of how that relationship is working now with social media. But you almost got the flip side of it. The disadvantage from the business side of things is now you're putting your product into potentially a hostile forum, and with these sort of Instagram threads or whatever on Twitter, you can definitely get a lot of sort of trolls on there. If they say bad stuff about the product that might not necessarily be true, it kind of can flood and kind of give the product a bad look. And it's something that the advertisers or promoters have no control over. So that's kind of the trade-off with sort of using athletes on social media. So interestingly enough, there's also a trade-off for the athletes as well, or the promoters as such. You may have heard about Kevin Hart, old homophobic tweets appearing just before he was supposed to host the Oscars, I think, and he was losing out on that. And it's kind of this thing that the internet never forgets, and sports stars and celebrities and comedians like Kevin Hart are now almost held at a higher expectation now, as they already are quite high. Now that takes on to the online world and things that predated their fame, as you see with Kyler Murray, who just recently won the Heisman Trophy for the best college athlete this year. Some homophobic tweets have resurfaced after he won. Interestingly enough, the timing of that was a bit suspicious, and there was a few forums that did sort of mention that he's had these tweets out for a while, and it just happened the sort of same evening that he won the award that these sort of resurfaced. So it's almost now sort of athletes now have to, of course, make sure that they don't say anything wrong, but now they almost have to protect themselves from premeditated attacks from certain people who want to tarnish their reputation. So kind of going off of last week's sort of reflection about TV viewership and how in certain sports and certain competitions it's decreasing, but there's still a huge market for sponsorship for sporting networks and sporting competitions. So last year there was expected a 3.8% rise in sponsorship, and now it's even still growing. And from that, there's still an expectation that sports revenue, including ticket sales and merchandising, is also supposed to rise. So the PwC said that it's expected to go from 71 billion in 2018 and grow to 80 billion by 2022. So there's still a huge market for these sort of TV deals. I mean, the NFL and MLS and NHL's contracts all are expiring in 2021, and there's still a lot of interest for those, sort of that showing of the sport. And more interestingly, non-common sport platforms are now getting involved. You see Twitter and Amazon and even Facebook are looking at streaming games, although it's sort of non-exclusive rights. As you see there, the NFL in the US. It's still interesting to see that non-typical sport outlets are getting involved with this, and they're still worth showing sports. And my kind of thinking is why exactly, and we'll be looking at that next. So this is sort of from my reflection and kind of how my mind's working. It's kind of a little bit of a roadmap in terms of sport and sponsorship and how it works with media. So you have sports sponsorship, and then we get increased viewership, whether that's from a competition or something like the NBA Finals or like the Super Bowl or something. So we have that increased sort of media presence. The media get involved. They're more interested in what's going on, and like I said, if there's more in season, like a close race for the title, that's sort of there's a lot of news, there's a lot of kind of all talking about it. Everyone's kind of got it on sort of Twitter and Instagram. Everyone's talking, so that leads to sort of increased sponsorship. So now as a sport, you can kind of boast, we've got all this, we got all these eyes, watching our sport, kind of, if you want your brand and whatever your goal is, whether it's brand awareness or sort of that sort of thing. Hey, listen, our sport's kind of, we got all the eyes at the moment, and then that sort of leads to more revenue. Then sponsorship deals are going up, and then you have different networks competing and different businesses competing to that, and then more revenue kind of leads back to increased viewership. So you might be able to invest more into the teams. You might be able to help teams out build better stadiums. Things like different camera angles is something kind of simple, and how that can directly increase the viewership. And so it's kind of this, for me, how I see it, it's kind of this cycle of increased viewership kind of leads to increased sponsorship, and that kind of leads to more revenue, and that can kind of go back in sort of as many times as it can, until either there's a drop in media presence, which then again the circle kind of goes around. So there's a drop in media presence, less people are going to want to sponsor, perhaps you get a less revenue, which perhaps then makes the game less interesting, and then you have a decrease in viewership, and then you have to work out how you're going to get that back up again. So while we're just in middle here, I thought kind of let you know about this little experiment I'm running. So I kind of indirectly got called out in class about the the time that I spend perhaps doing things that I shouldn't, or perhaps not doing enough of what I should, including reading and maybe too much time on social media. So the discussion we're having was the competition for leisure time. So I'm actually going to do a little bit of a sort of diary this week with where I spend time and what I do with it, especially with social media. So I'm going to be tracking that, and hopefully next week I'll be able to bring you some numbers on that. So it should be an interesting little task. So the question in class that was posed to us is, is indigenous sport under fire? So, and the example that was given was cricket. So, I kind of went on with that because cricket is not as big here in Canada or the States as it may be in places like the UK, Australia, and South Africa. So I kind of wanted to do a little bit of investigation on that. So, from what I can find, the TV figures, especially in Australia, have been going down. So almost fourfold drop there. And even the participation levels in the UK have been dropping with cricket. Now, interestingly enough, the top three reasons why participations have been dropping in the UK, because one, lack of facilities, two, cultural barriers, and three, time availability. Now, interestingly with cricket, you can get a game or a match that lasts anywhere from each side having 20 overs, which will be done in a few hours, to each team having 2 innings each, or however that was, which can last up until 4 or 5 days. So time availability is definitely a valid reason. Now, interestingly, whether cricket have been doing this on purpose or not, but I assume on purpose because it's quite clever, is they've been using certain adaptations to the game to perhaps make it more attractive to watch and definitely to participate. So things like the Big Bash and IPL, Indian Premier League, they've taken the issue of time or time availability. So each team will have 20 overs, and the games are a lot more interesting because the teams are trying to score more points in a short amount of time, which results in bigger hits. If you're not familiar with cricket, bigger sixes and fours, and the teams are trying to get bigger scores. So it's quite interesting that those sort of innovations that happen with the game to perhaps combat issues with viewership and participation. So lastly for this week, I just wanted to kind of share a few thoughts around kind of my thinking this week with a good quality versus good reputation. So I was kind of asking, do people care more about what they're getting or more what it stands for? So there was an article from Forbes that said millennials expect brands to be open and communicate about how they operate in the world and to seek positive social change. So that's why I've got the Kaepernick Nike advert, the Just Do It one, because it was quite interesting, because we've seen that it did have quite a good reaction, or quite a reaction, we should say, from both sides, from people burning Nike stuff to actually the people having a lot of support But interestingly, some people do mention how from Colin Kaepernick's standpoint that it could be a little bit hypocritical, believing something, even if it means sacrificing everything. Some people say that Nike perhaps don't have the best workplace environments for some of their factories. And if Colin Kaepernick's fighting for equality, I know it's more race than anything else, but could it be, a bit hypocritical for him partnering with Nike? I don't know. But again, it's sort of that thing where do we almost neglect the product and more care about the image? And definitely have that for the NFL. So, there's a lot of stuff around the NFL from everything from athletes, taking drugs, that's both recreational and performance enhancing, to physical violence with a lot of their players. I shouldn't say a lot, some of their players, and then stuff from the CT and the concussion stuff that happens with their players. The NFL do a good job of, from one perspective, you could say they do a good job of sort of hiding those serious factors behind things they do. So here when they did the international series, they had sort of the teams that were there in London playing. They had them come on stage, and they had a few NFL legends come through with that. So do they almost try and make us forget about all the problems we have with that sport? So that's something I was just thinking about this week. Perhaps it's something we can come back to later on this year, perhaps if we have sort of a better idea about public relations and how companies sort of portray themselves in the media. That's all from this week. Thank you very much for listening again. I hope these aren't too long. I'm going to try and keep them as short and sweet as I can, but I think it's working really well for me to kind of get my thoughts down, perhaps a little bit easier than paper. So yes, once again, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week.